Rain had just stopped when I saw my husband holding the door open for a woman old enough to be his mother, and the way he touched the small of her back told me everything I'd spent 3 months pretending not to know. I was standing across the street from a little bistro in Yorkville, the kind of place we used to say was too expensive for people like us, back when us still meant something. I'd come downtown to pick up fabric samples for a client in Rosedale. That was all. A Tuesday errand. I wasn't following him. I want that on the record, because later, when I told this story to the few people I trusted, that was always the first thing they assumed. No. I just happened to be standing under the awning of a closed dry cleaner when he stepped out onto Bel Air with his hand on her back like he'd done it 1,000 times. My name is Holly. I was 31 that autumn, married almost 4 years, and had built a small home staging and design business that was finally, after a lot of lean winters, starting to turn real money. My husband. I'll just call him my husband for now, the way you do when a name starts to taste wrong in your mouth. Worked in commercial real estate downtown. He was good at it. Charming in the way that makes other men trust you and women forgive you. We met at a friend's cottage on Georgian Bay the summer after I finished college, and for a long time I thought I'd gotten lucky. The woman was maybe 60, beautifully kept, the way money keeps you. Camel coat, a silk scarf knotted at the throat, silver haircut blunt at the jaw. She laughed at something he said and put her gloved hand flat against his chest, and he leaned into it. I should have walked away. Instead, I crossed the street. I don't know what came over me. My heart was going like a snare drum, but my face did something strange. It smiled. A big, warm, hostessy smile, the one I use when a client's awful taste means I have to praise a sofa I hate. I walked right up to the two of them on the sidewalk and I said, "Well, hello. What a treat to run into you." I turned to her, still smiling. "And this must be a friend of yours. She's lovely." "Aunt, is it? Mentor? You two look like you've known each other for, decades." The color went out of his face in stages like a screen dimming. The woman's smile froze and then cracked, the lipstick at the corners of her mouth bunching up. He opened his mouth and nothing came out. "Anyway," I said brightly, "don't let me interrupt. I've got fabric to pick up." And I turned and walked north on Bay, my smile still nailed in place, my hands shaking so hard I had to shove them in my coat pockets. I made it 2 blocks before I had to stop and lean against the cold glass of a bank window. The November wind off the lake found every gap in my coat. I remember thinking very clearly that the woman who just smiled and walked away was someone I'd never met before. The old me would have screamed. The old me would have cried right there on Bel Air. This new one had already started doing math. Here's what I knew before that afternoon, the things I'd filed away in the back drawer where you keep the thoughts you're not ready for. He'd started taking weekend trips in August. Calgary, he said, a portfolio of office towers his firm was advising on, a difficult client who needed hand-holding. He'd come back tired and short-tempered, and his suitcase would smell faintly of a perfume that wasn't anything I owned. There were charges on the joint card I didn't understand. A women's boutique on Bloor, $400, and then $1,100 twice in 1 month. When I'd asked, lightly, he'd said it was a closing gift for a client's wife. I'd nodded and changed the subject because my fall season was insane and I genuinely did not have the energy to start a war I wasn't sure I could win. The week before putting his shirts in the wash, I'd found a folded receipt in his trouser pocket. Holt Renfrew, $8,200, women's apparel. I'd photographed it, put it back, and said nothing. So no, the bistro wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation. That night, he came home at 9. I'd already made dinner and eaten alone and washed my plate. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen in his good coat, and for a second, I let myself imagine the version where he crossed the room and held me and said it was nothing. She was a client, I swear to God. Holly, it's not what it looked like. I would not have believed him. But I wanted, for 1 stupid second, to be offered the lie. Instead, he said, "We need to talk." "Do we?" I said. That was Eleanor Whitmore. She's the chair of a holding company we're advising. Her husband died in the spring and she's been fragile. I'm the lead on her file. I was just looking after her. With your hand on her back? For God's sake, Holly, she just come from her lawyers. She was upset. I dried my hands on the tea towel slowly and I looked at him. Does looking after a grieving client cost $8,200 at Holtz? Because I found the receipt. And don't tell me it's a gift for someone's wife. I've heard that one. His jaw moved, but nothing came out, and that was its own kind of answer. I went to bed in the spare room. I lay in the dark and listened to him moving around the apartment, the clink of a glass, the low murmur of a phone call he took out on the balcony with the door shut. Around 2 in the morning, my phone lit up. An e-transfer notification from our bank, $20,000, moved from his account to mine. The message line said, "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time. $20,000. He knew me, knew my pride, knew I'd choke before I'd ever take his money. And he'd sent it anyway, not for me, but for himself, so that somewhere in the wreckage he could tell himself he'd tried. I didn't accept it. I didn't decline it either. I just turned the phone face down and stared at the ceiling until the radiator clanked on and the windows went gray with morning. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that, not because I was strong. I wasn't, not yet, but because something in me had gone very quiet and very cold, and the cold was the only thing holding me up. By the end of that week, I'd done 3 things. The first was finding a small condo to rent up near my studio in Leslieville, 400 square feet, a bed and a desk, and a window that looked at a brick wall. I told the landlord I needed it as a showroom. That was the story I told myself too. The second was calling a lawyer. A friend from my college days, now doing family law out of an office near the Eaton Center, gave me a name. A sharp, plain-spoken woman, I'll call her lawyer, because she ended up belonging to more than just me. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, then set down her pen. "Adultery is almost useless in this province," she said. "Ontario's no fault. A judge does not care that your husband bought another woman a coat. What a judge cares about is property, and what I care about is whether he's hiding any." She looked at me over her glasses. "You said Calgary. You ever actually see a hotel bill from Calgary?" I hadn't. I'd never seen a single piece of paper that proved he'd been where he said. "Then that's where we dig," she said. The third thing I did, I'm not proud of. I hired a man to follow him. He wasn't anything like the movies. A soft, balding fellow in his 50s who drove a Honda with 190,000 kilometers on it and ate sunflower seeds out of a paper bag while we talked in a Tim Hortons on the Danforth. I'll call him the investigator. I slid him an envelope and a photo and said, "He says he's in Calgary. Find out if he is." The investigator looked at the photo, then at me, kindly. "Cheating husband, eh? I do a lot of these." "It's more than that," I said, though I didn't yet know how much more. "Just find out where he really goes." He nodded and tucked the photo into his jacket like it was nothing, like he wasn't holding the loose thread of my entire life. The cancellations started the second week. A client in Forest Hill I'd been courting for 2 months went cold overnight. Decided to go a different direction, her assistant emailed. No explanation. Then a developer canceled a model suite contract. Then a referral I'd been promised evaporated. By the end of the month, I'd lost 5 jobs, all of them solid, all of them gone with the same vague, apologetic non-reason. I called a contractor I'd worked with for years, a straight-shooting guy who knew everyone in the trade. After the usual chit-chat, I asked him, casually, if he'd heard anything about me lately. He went quiet for a second too long. "Holly," he said, "somebody's been talking. Word going around is your last few jobs had problems. Shoddy work, fights with clients, liens. I know that's garbage. I've worked with you, but it's specific. Somebody put real detail into it." "Who?" "That I don't know, but you know how this business is. Reputation's the only thing you've got." I hung up and sat in my dark little condo and looked at the brick wall through the window and understood, in a cold rush, that this was not bad luck. Eleanor Whitmore. Because by then, I'd looked her up. The obituary of her husband, the holding company, the charity Gallus. Eleanor Whitmore was telling me in the only language people like her speak that I could not win. Then her assistant came to see me, a composed, gray-suited woman who arrived at my studio without an appointment and would not sit down, who slid a business card and then a thick envelope across my desk. The card said the assistant's name and underneath, office of the chair. The envelope had money in it, a lot of it. Mrs. Whitmore wishes to express her regret for any distress, the assistant said, in a voice with no person inside it, and to convey that her relationship with your husband is strictly professional. I didn't touch the envelope. I lit a cigarette. I'd quit 2 years before. I'd started again that month and looked at her through the smoke. Tell me, does strictly professional always involve a hand on the small of the back? Because I'm new to corporate culture. A crack opened in her flat expression. She produced a second sheet of paper. If I'd sign a non-disclosure, agree never to speak of my husband's relationship with Mrs. Whitmore, or what I'd seen. Mrs. Whitmore was prepared to introduce my firm to 3 of her wealthy friends. Restore what had been taken was the unspoken half. Get out of my office, I said. She gathered the envelope without a flicker and gave me a long, assessing look, the kind you give a problem you're deciding how to solve. Then she left, and the smell of her perfume hung in the room for an hour. I should have been frightened. Instead, I was furious, and the fury was clarifying, like cold water. They thought they could buy me. That meant I was worth buying. That meant I was a threat. And a threat is only a threat if it knows something, which meant there was something to know. The investigator called me a few nights later. His voice had changed. The folksy ease was gone. Holly, he said, your husband's not in Calgary. He's got a place in a building down by the lake, registered to a numbered company, but the hydro and the buzzer logs say he's the one living in it, and there's money moving, big wires, the last 3 months, out to an account offshore. I can't see where it lands, but that's not what's got my attention. What's got your attention? A pause. Eleanor Whitmore's husband, Jeffrey. The official line is he had a heart attack in his sleep last spring, but the housekeeper who found him, her story doesn't hold. She told police she went up to wake him at 6:30 and found him and called it in, but the building's security cameras show her leaving the property at 4 in the morning and not coming back till 8. 4 hours, Holly. Nobody asked her about it. Man had a heart history, so everybody shrugged. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Why are you telling me this like it matters to my divorce? Because the wire transfers out of your husband's offshore account, he said. They run through the same intermediary bank as a payment Jeffrey Whitmore made the week before he died. $1 million to an account nobody can name. He let that sit. I don't think you've got a cheating husband. I think you've got something a lot worse. You want me to keep going? Outside my window, the city was doing its ordinary night. Streetcars rumbling down Queen, somebody laughing on the sidewalk below. My whole small, careful life had cracked open and something dark was leaking out of it. Keep going, I said. I want all of it. Our lawyer found her own thread, pulling at the company instead of the body. She called me into her office and laid a corporate chart across the table. Eleanor Whitmore's husband owned the controlling stake in the family company, she said. When he died, no clean will, just a mess. 40% went to her, 30% to their daughter, 30% into trusts. But here's the part that interests me. She tapped a line. The daughter's a minor. Her shares are voted by her guardian, and the guardian is Eleanor, so in practice, Eleanor controls 70% of the company. Then she's already won, I said. Why does she need my husband? Because of this. Our lawyer turned the page. Jeffrey put a clause in. If Eleanor remarries, half her inherited shares pass straight to the daughter. She can't get married, not legally, but a stable partner who plays the devoted companion in public, props up the share price, scares off the board members trying to push her out, without ever signing a marriage certificate that triggers the clause. She closed the file. Your husband isn't her lover, Holly. He's a prop. And I made some calls. Your husband's firm. They're advising the Whitmore Company. But the partner running that file isn't him. It's somebody else entirely. His expense claims for all those Calgary trips got bounced by his own accounting department because the firm never sent him there. The little office music played on, oblivious. I held my cold coffee and my knuckles went white around the cup. He lied about everything, I said. My voice came out flat and steady and it frightened me a little. Not just the affair, the trips, the job, the reason, all of it from the start. He may be lying to more people than just you, she said gently. Holly, file now. Petition to freeze what we can. The only thing still in his name we can find is your apartment and one car. Everything else has already walked out the door. If you wait, you'll be left holding nothing. I don't want his money. This isn't about wanting it. It's about not being the last fool standing when the music stops. I filed, and the world tightened around me in response, the way it does when you push on something powerful. My studio landlord called to terminate my lease early. His nephew needed the space, so sorry, he'd covered the penalty. Every other commercial space I called had mysteriously just leased or had bumped the rent 30% the moment I gave my firm's name. My one remaining assistant came to me red-eyed. Her partner had been transferred to Vancouver and she had to go. Coincidence on coincidence on coincidence, each one plausible, all of them together impossible. Eleanor Whitmore was erasing me by inches politely from a distance. The night I understood the full shape of it, I came home to find a photograph tucked under the wiper of my car in the parking garage. Not a ticket, a photo, taken from behind, of my parents in a duty-free shop. My mom and dad, who'd retired to a little place in Portugal years ago, who I'd been counting the days to see because they were flying home to Toronto that very week. On the back, in block capitals, last chance. That was the moment the fear turned into something else, something with a spine. Because here's the thing, nobody, not Eleanor, not her assistant, not my husband, had bothered to learn about me. Before I made beautiful rooms for rich people, I'd done a master's in materials chemistry. I'd left it because the work was lonely and the money was thin and I liked making spaces that made people happy. But I knew how to read a research file. I knew what a toxicology screen looked like. I knew, when the investigator finally got me a grainy photo from Jeffrey Whitmore's bedside table, a prescription bottle, and beside it, 3 loose white tablets that did not match, exactly what to type into a database. The pills weren't his heart medication, they were a sedative, the heavy kind they give for severe anxiety, and when you stack them on top of certain other drugs, they can knock a heart straight out of rhythm. A healthy heart. A man whose last physical 3 months before he died had come back clean. I had a piece of it, not all of it, but enough to know that the thing I'd stumbled into was not an affair and not a divorce. It was a killing, and it was being covered with money, and I was now standing inside the cover. My husband called me at 2 a.m. a few days later. No hello, just his voice, low and fast and frightened in a way I'd never heard from him. Whatever you found, stop. Delete it. Get out of the city for a while. I mean it, Holly, please. A ragged breath. Eleanor is not who you think. Jeffrey's death? Just listen. On my work laptop, there's a file, encrypted. The password is the day we met, not your birthday, the day we met. There's a second password inside. Use her birthday. What's in there can protect you. Take it and run. Stop digging. What is going on? The line went dead. I called back, off. I sat on the floor of my 400-square-foot life, with all of it spread around me. The photos, the bank codes, the toxicology, the picture of my parents, and I understood that I was standing in the middle of something 20 years older than my marriage, and that the only way out was straight through. I drove to the apartment we'd shared. He hadn't changed the locks. The place smelled shut up and stale. His laptop sat on the desk in the study, the one I'd given him for his birthday, and when I typed the day we met it opened, and when I found the encrypted folder and typed Eleanor Whitmore's birthday it opened too, and inside there was a single video file and I made myself watch it. Security footage, a grand bedroom, a man asleep with his back to the camera, Jeffrey. The timestamp read just before 3. The door opens, and a woman in a robe comes in with a glass of water, takes a small bottle from the nightstand, shakes pills into the glass, helps him sit up, holds it to his mouth. Eleanor. She sits a while. She leaves. The clock jumps. The door opens again, and a second person comes in. Dark clothes, hat and mask, no face at all, crosses to the bed, takes a syringe from a pocket, finds his arm, presses, waits, pockets it, goes. The clock jumps once more and the man on the bed begins to convulse, and then he is still. I was still staring at the frozen screen when the study door opened behind me and Eleanor Whitmore said, "I did warn you, dear." She was holding a small pistol and her hand, I noticed, was not entirely steady. "You're a clever girl," she said. "I always thought so, but clever girls who can't leave things alone, they do tend to come to bad ends." "Why does my husband have this video?" I said. My own calm astonished me. Why would he tell me to come get it? A flicker crossed her face. "Because your husband is a sentimental coward who kept insurance," she said. "He always meant to use it against me one day. I let him think he'd hidden it. It told me everything I needed to know about his loyalty." She lifted the gun an inch. "Jeffrey was a weak man clinging to a company he could no longer run. I gave that company 20 years of my life, and his will was built to trap me in widowhood forever. So I corrected it." "Don't look so shocked. People like Jeffrey are always certain the rules are for everyone but themselves." "And my husband's a prop," I said, "and when the deal closes, you'll throw him out, like Jeffrey." "Like the rubbish he is, yes." Her finger tightened. "And like you, I'm afraid. A heartbroken wife breaks into her estranged husband's home to steal from him. The owner's companion surprises her. There's a struggle, so sad. I have thought many times since about how close I came to dying in that study, and about the thing that saved me, which was not courage but noise. Footsteps in the hall, and then the door swinging open, and my husband standing there gray-faced and exhausted with a gun of his own, pointed at her. 3 people, 2 guns, 1 small room. "Put it down, Eleanor," he said. She didn't, but she turned the barrel to cover us both. "You too?" "I was never on your side," he said, "not since you told me to put something in my wife's coffee." The floor tilted under me. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on her. 3 months ago," he said, still to Eleanor, "you wanted me to slip something into Holly's pills, make her drift, make her unsteady, then a fall, an accident, a grieving husband who inherits and quietly moves the money on to you. I bought the pills, and I swapped them for vitamins, every single one, and you found out. And that's when you changed the plan. That's when you made me your prop instead, because by then you had this." He nodded at the screen. "You let me film it. You knew I'd keep a copy. You wanted me to. It was a leash." I remembered, then, a bad stretch in late summer when I couldn't sleep, when he'd come home with a bottle of sleeping pills and press them on me. I'd never taken them. I hate taking anything. They were still in a drawer somewhere, untouched, ordinary little vitamins, the only reason I was alive to be standing in that room. "The police are already coming," my husband said. "I called them from the lobby." And as if his words had summoned them, the sirens started, far off and rising, and in the half-second Eleanor's eyes flicked toward the window. I grabbed the heavy fountain pen off the desk and drove it into her wrist, and the gun went off into the ceiling and then clattered to the floor. And my husband kicked it away and put her against the wall, and that was the scene the officers found. Her screaming, him penning her, me standing there with a bloody pen in my fist and a murder frozen on a laptop screen. It would be tidy to tell you it ended there. It didn't. She had a twin. The investigator found it after. A sister named Evangeline, committed to a psychiatric facility 20 years before, after she'd witnessed Eleanor set the fire that killed their parents. Vanished from that hospital 3 years ago with Eleanor logged as her only visitor. The woman in the video, the one who poured the pills, that was Eleanor. But the masked figure with the syringe, the alibi, the whole architecture of deniability that ran on the sister, who turned out to be not the killer, but the longest-held prisoner of all. Eleanor had spent 20 years using her own sister as a bargaining chip, and at the center of it was a 15-year-old girl, Jeffrey's daughter, who'd been told her aunt was her mother her whole life and whose real mother was the woman locked away. I found that girl at the airport, terrified, being tailed by men. Eleanor still ran from a remand cell. I found a brass safety deposit key her father had hidden for her, and inside the box, instead of money, a recording of Jeffrey's tired old voice explaining the whole 20-year rot, the fire, the cover-up, the will built to free his real love from her sister's cage, and a clause that handed the girl everything the moment her mother was found alive. We found her mother in a shuttered private hospital out past the airport, 90 pounds and hollow-eyed, whispering about fire, and when her daughter knelt in front of her, something behind her ruined face slowly came back on, like a pilot light catching. Eleanor got life. The jury was out 6 hours. She recanted, of course, blamed Jeffrey, blamed her sister, blamed everyone, and none of it held, because by then we'd handed the Crown a former detective's falsified fire report, a bought-off retirement, 20 years of paper. The last time I saw her, she mouthed 2 words at me across the courtroom, "You lose," with a little smile, as though she still believed it. Maybe she was right, because the last thing she ever said to me, in the visiting room with the glass between us, was a question. "Has it never struck you as strange," she said, almost gently, "that your parents moved to Portugal so suddenly? That they were so very against you marrying into that man's world?" I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice. "Jeffrey and your father were old friends," she said. "The night of the fire, 20 years ago, your parents were meant to be at the house for dinner. They canceled. And afterward, they started asking the wrong questions, and Jeffrey got frightened and he paid them to stop. $300,000 and a soft landing overseas. Look at your father's bank records from that year, dear, and then ask yourself why he never let you near the past." She sat back, satisfied. We all live inside lies. The only choice is whether to keep them or open them. I called my mother from the car. I asked her straight about the fire and the money, and there was a silence on the line so long and so total that it answered me before she did. Then I heard her start to cry, and she said my father's business had been about to go under, and Jeffrey had promised no one would be hurt, and they believed him because they'd needed to. I sat in the parking garage with the phone in my lap, and I didn't scream, and I didn't cry. I felt, instead, a strange, awful lightning. The way you do when the last load drops off a shelf that's been groaning for years and the whole thing finally just falls. Everyone in this story had made a trade. Eleanor traded her family for a company. Jeffrey traded his conscience for a wife he wanted. My parents traded the truth for a roof. My husband traded me for a partnership, and then, at the very last second, traded the partnership back for whatever scrap of himself he had left. We were all just people who'd looked at something we loved and something we feared and made the smaller, dirtier choice. The only difference was who got to live in the clean house afterward. We divorced quietly in the spring. He gave me everything, the apartment, the car, the savings, and I took none of it except the deed to the little building my studio sits in, which he bought outright and put in my name, and which I let him do because refusing it would have cost me more pride than I had left, and because some apologies need a place to land even when forgiveness isn't coming. He moved out west. Last I heard, he was selling industrial space in Calgary, the city he'd lied to me about for so long it had become a real place in my mouth before I ever saw it. The girls' company hired my firm to redesign their head office, a job big enough to carry me through a year and then some. Her mother gets a little better every month, knows faces now, finishes sentences, asked the other day whether her daughter had done her homework, 20 years late and somehow exactly on time. I visit them sometimes on Sundays. The girl is running a company at 16 and learning to braid her mother's hair, which her mother says is the thing her sister used to do for her before, when they were small and loved each other, and every time she says it, I have to look out the window for a minute. My parents came home that autumn after all. I let them. We are careful with each other now, in the way of people who've learned exactly how much weight the floor can take. I haven't forgiven them, not all the way, but I've stopped needing to. which I'm told is its own kind of mercy. They were drowning and someone threw them a rope, and they didn't ask whose neck was on the other end. I'd like to believe I'd have chosen differently. I'm honest enough now to know I can't be sure. It snowed early this year. I stood at the window of my studio in Leslieville and watched it come down over the brick and the streetcar wires and the parked cars, softening all of it. And I thought about the woman who'd stood on a sidewalk in Yorkville 18 months ago and smiled at her husband and a murderer and walked away with her hands shaking in her pockets. She thought her life had ended that afternoon. She had no idea it was only the cover coming off. I picked up my stylus and started a new drawing, a blank room waiting to be filled with light, and outside the snow kept falling, quiet and clean and covering everything that the year had broken, the way it always does, the way it always will. The thing that still keeps me up some nights isn't the gun in Eleanor's hand or the video on that laptop. It's how ordinary the first lie was. A weekend trip, a perfume that wasn't mine. I told myself I was too busy to look, and the truth is I was too afraid, and fear dressed up as busyness is still just fear. Every awful thing that came after grew out of a small, comfortable choice somebody made to not look. Jeffrey not looking at what his wife was capable of, my parents not looking at whose money they were taking, me not looking at the receipts in my husband's pocket. Nothing in this story came out of nowhere. It all came from somewhere, planted years before by people who wanted the easy thing more than the right one, and it grew in the dark exactly because nobody would turn on a light. What saved me, in the end, wasn't luck and it wasn't rage, though I had plenty of both. It was the part of me that refused to be bought. When Eleanor's assistant slid that envelope across my desk, taking it would have been so easy and it would have killed me by inches all the same. The line I wouldn't cross? That's the only thing that kept me a person instead of a piece on her board. I've come to believe that's the first thing you have to protect, harder than your money or your marriage, the small, stubborn sense of what you will and won't do, even when no one's watching, even when crossing it would solve everything tonight. But standing on principle isn't enough if you can't think. I'd have died in that study if I'd only been angry. What got me through was old training I'd half forgotten. Knowing how to read a file, what a pill bottle meant when a story didn't add up. So I'd say to anyone watching, never let anyone convince you that the things you learned, the careful way you notice the world, are useless. They are the difference between being a victim and being a witness. Sharpen your mind even when life seems to have no use for it, because the day comes when it's the only weapon you've got. And then you need the thing that's hardest to teach, which is the will to keep standing up after each new floor gives out. 5 lost clients, a poisoned reputation, a photo of my parents under my wiper. Any one of those could have ended me, and the only reason they didn't is that I decided, every single morning, to get up and do the next ordinary thing. Answer the email, meet the lawyer, drive to the airport. You don't beat someone like Eleanor in one grand gesture. You beat her by refusing to stay down. Holly, who smiles on that sidewalk, really did die that afternoon, like she thought she had. The woman who walked out the other side is harder and lonelier, and I wouldn't trade her for anything. The snow covers what the year broke. It doesn't undo it. It just lets you start drawing the next clean room.